Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Spurlock Museum's Contemporary Conversations program. My name is Monica Scott, and I'm the Public Education and Volunteer Coordinator. We would like to begin today by recognizing and acknowledging that we are on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Waya, Miami, Mascouten, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As a land grant institution, the University of Illinois has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution for the past 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is a start as we move forward for the next 150 years. Today's program connects with Spurlock Museum's current exhibit, Blues Dancing and Its African American Roots. Dr. Cynthia Oliver and Dr. Thomas DeFrance will explore the theme, Dancing the African Diaspora. I'll briefly introduce each guest. Cynthia Oliver is a St. Croix, Virgin Island reared dance maker. Her work incorporates textures of Caribbean performance with African and American aesthetic sensibilities. She has toured the globe as a featured dancer with numerous contemporary companies and as an actor. She earned her PhD in performance studies from New York University, is widely published, and has won numerous awards, including a New York Dance and Performance Bessie Award for her choreography. At the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, she is professor in the dance department, affiliate in African American and Gender and Women's Studies, a university scholar, and recent Center for Advanced Study inductee. She currently serves as Associate Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation in the Humanities, Arts, and related fields. Her most recent evening-length performance work, Virago Man, Dim, premiered at the Brooklyn Academy of Music's Next Wave Festival in New York, toured the country, and closed here at the Krannert Center for the Performing Arts in the fall of 2018. Thank you, Cynthia, for being here. Thomas DeFrance studied music composition and computer science as an undergraduate and is currently a professor in the Department of African and African American Studies and program in dance, and a core faculty, graduate faculty in computational media, arts, and culture at Duke University. Directs Slippage, Performance Culture Technology, a research group that explores emerging technology in live performance and deploys bespoke live processing systems in performance, crafting interfaces that translate movements into light and sound to underscore the creative concerns at hand. Received the 2017 Outstanding Research in Dance Award from the Dance Studies Association, consulted with the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, contributing concept and voiceover for the permanent installation on Black social dance that opened with the museum in 2016. Has a large body of written and creative work, including the 2004 book, Dancing Revelations, Alan Ailey's Embodiment of African American Culture, and the 2017 piece, Reverse Gesture Review, commissioned by the National Museum of Art in response to the work of artist Kara Walker. Finally, DeFrance believes in our shared capacity to do better and to engage our creative spirit for a collective good that is anti-racist, anti-homophobic, proto-feminist, and queer affirming. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Oliver and Dr. DeFrance.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Monica. I really appreciate that. It's always great to be in conversation with my dear friend for many years. You all will hear us call each other endearments. I will call Dr. DeFrance Tommy, because that's how I know and love him. And he will call me what he will.
Before we get too deep, I'm so glad CO. Sometimes I call you CO, see that? Because I do feel like you're my correctional officer many times. thinking through issues and concerns and also in creative address. I want to start by lighting a candle here. I'm broadcasting from my laboratory in Durham, North Carolina, and we're on the unceded lands of the Shakori, the Catawba, and the Eno people. And I wanted to be sure to bring their presence into our collaboration and conversation tonight.
Ashe.
Ashe.
So we were invited to have a conversation about blues dance. The Spurlock Museum was to have an opening in this fall around blues dancing, and to have you here on campus live. Of course, you know, all of our lives have been upset by COVID, and so they, like many institutions, pivoted so that we would now do this via Zoom webinar. And so I thought that I might start with a little bit of a blurb from the museum site, and then kind of as an entry point, talk a little bit about my own understanding of the term, or misunderstanding of the term, depending on what position you're in. So the Spurlock Museum site states, blues dance is a new name encompassing a family of social and popular dance practices. Now, I grew up in the Virgin Islands in St. Croix. We often listened to and enjoyed African-American music as much as we did Afro-Caribbean music. And so when folks would say, I'm going to dance a blues, and you know, folks would say it with our dialect, I'm going to dance a blues, what it meant was not a particular kind of dance style. It meant that we were going to dance to slow music. And that dance might be a slow drag or a grind, but there wasn't a blues dance per se. So I'm wondering if maybe as an entry point, you might talk about your own experience of that, and then how you understand that in terms of the history that we have all come to study and know about Africanist practices.
No, thank you for that story. It's a really great way to sort of set off our conversation for the evening. And you know, I've been working on a grand project about Black social dance, and it's, you know, it's quite an ambitious sort of project to try to characterize, but it's a, you know, it's a theoretical and research-based historical analysis to try to draw some sort of mappings of different developments and how our social dances have been in relationship to our political systems and our sense of imagination and creativity. So I think that inside your story, for me, it reminds me how Black American cultures, Black cultures, if you will, or Black thought, isn't necessarily bound up in territorializing expression. So this idea that you're going to make a territory and then the practice has to fit into the territory, it has to be a thing we can recognize and call a blues dancing, and it's going to have maybe certain gestures or movements. That's not really been our creative drive historically. I mean, if we think about how we went from spirituals to gospel music, it was a kind of transition of a political moment and a social possibility. And, you know, these traditions have, maybe they have aspects that we could think of as being one distinct from the other, but there's an awful lot that's also shared in there between these traditions. And I think blues as a musical and dance form, of course, emerges as it does, and then other things come after them. But it probably doesn't, as your story offers, necessarily mean there's a certain thing that is blues dancing that other things, you know, don't belong in the category, or, you know, it's sort of only to be done a certain kind of a way. That's maybe the thing that's not so important in terms of the theoretical analyses and understandings of Black American culture.
I love your instance of speaking about gospel music, or because what it makes me think about are the roots of our dances, and the roots of our dances on North American soil. As we've studied them, we know the importance of the ring shout. And I would like for us to go all the way back to that kind of originary moment for us here on this continent, and talk about, if you could talk a little bit about the ring shout as, a root, R-O-O-T, and the ring shout as a root, R-O-U-T-E, for us to access other kinds of performances that we see today.
That's terrific, because the ring shout is a kind of originary moment and originary sort of creative address that Black people, African Americans, were able to develop this technology of the spirit. And these days, Cynthia, I am thinking of dance as a technology, especially now that we're in this physical distance. We're not necessarily socially distanced, but we're physically distanced from each other. And so we need technologies that help us feel better, or at least understand how we feel. And dance certainly is a technology that's designed to do that. And Black dances that are concerned with spirit, the dances of the Orishas we might talk about, the candomblé if you like, but definitely the ring shout as an American kind of invention that was a dance of the spirit that was remarkably allowed by the Christian sort of missionaries and sort of the Christian sort of denominations that were overseeing Black Americans who had been enslaved. The ring shout was a form of worship and dance that was sometimes allowed. So it becomes super important for us as people, as it tends to sort of gather our creative address, our fantasy address, our spiritual address, and our physical need to embody sound and gesture to what Kimberly Jordan has called running spirit through the body, through the dancing and through the songs. So the ring shout is, it does have a form, it's in a ring, and something that the missionaries were really concerned about. If you're someone who studies the Bible at all, there are some theologians who say the Bible says one must not dance. Then others point towards how David danced before the Lord. And, we might understand a little bit of these discrepancies in how to read the Gospels, if you will. But there was this idea that one isn't necessarily dancing if one doesn't cross the feet. So the idea of crossing the feet becomes, is it literally like a hopscotching, or is it moving your feet, a certain distance one away from the other? But the ring shout gets allowed as a form of dance and worship. And that's urgent for us as Black people, because we do believe in worship and dance and creativity being lined up among each other.
One of the things one of the many things I love about the ring shout is that shuffling, constant quality. And because we were unable to cross our legs, cross our feet, because that was defined as dancing, we created another kind of rhythmic action that then we added percussion to because of the prohibition around drumming. And so the body and the voice became our percussion system with this action of the feet. And what's exciting for me about it is the energy of it, as you talked about the spirit, and how much it has endured. And so that circular practice that is democratized, that as you're talking about kind of not territorializing dance, we also didn't do that in terms of ownership of the practice, as it's a collective practice. And so the circle is an emblem for how we think about community and how we look to each other for contribution. And it comes as far forward now as we see in the cypher and hip hop. and all of these other forms where we get a chance to kind of improvise and see each other and expect innovation from one another and build upon that. And I'm just wondering if it would be helpful to our audience for you to offer a little bit of information about some of the characteristics of Africanist dance that we've seen over time. There are a couple of giants in our field who we look to when we talk about, kind of identifying some of the key qualities about African American, Africanist dance practices that are embodied in that ring shout that we've seen kind of move forward historically. If you could talk a little bit about some of those characteristics.
Oh, I'd be glad to. This is the stuff that I live for and live through, of course, as well. So I imagine you're thinking about the, as you called them, the giants, Robert Farris Thompson, who was an art historian who worked for much of his career at Yale University, and then Brenda Dixon Gottchild, who is a goddess to us now as a researcher and scholar and artist and based in Philadelphia and is emerita from Temple University. And between these two amazing intellects have helped us recognize sort of attributes of performance that we see as maybe commonalities, if we want to think of them that way, or maybe as aesthetic imperatives, like things that need to happen for the performance to be realized as fully as it might. So Thompson had a sort of 5-part model that he offered out based on his research in what he called sub-Saharan Africa at the time in the 1960s. That's how these areas were called by anthropologists and researchers. And he said that, well, these things that you find across all the places that he went in his research were percussive attack. So by that, he meant things would hit hard. So you're going to hit the thing somehow, and there's going to be an accent that's going to help move the event forward. He said there's going to be complex rhythm. So the rhythm is going to be unexpected and complex and layering one thing on top of another. He said there was this thing.
Can I interrupt you for a second? I don't know if Monica let everybody know that you are an expert tapper. So this rhythm that's happening in as you are in that beautiful space of yours is because Tommy is a tapper, y'all.
Thank you for that. Like, yes, rhythm dancers unite. Rhythm.
That's right. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No,
Continue.
you're fine. I appreciated that. That was a nice accent, cross rhythm, if you will. He has this other idea that we're going to come to towards blues dancing that's super important. So let me save that one. He talks about the aesthetic of the cool. So this is also thought of as a big part of blues dancing or dancing in general for African people, that you want to actually balance hot and cool. So if you're doing one thing super fast and hard, maybe some other part of the body is balanced in a super calm way. And this is a sort of aesthetic balancing that is always evidenced in these forms of expression. He talked about the dances of derision, or the forms of dancing where you tease someone else. So this might be the bases of competition. And you reminded us of the cypher and hip hop and the battles, and exactly these sorts of addresses where there's a teasing one to the next, like calling us by our nicknames is sign, it's a sign of affection, and also establishing that we're among each other. So how the derision really is an important part of Africanist expression. But then there's this other thing he called apart playing. And this is also going to be very important for partner dancing. So apart playing, what he meant was that everyone has to bring their own element to the exchange. You don't mimic someone else or do the same thing that they're doing. You dance or play music apart and together at the same time. So Professor Brenda Dixon Gottchild helped us understand this as the individual within a group dynamic. The group is working as a whole, and then the individual is allowed to shine and expected to shine, maybe in the center of the circle, but certainly among the group. So these characteristics help us start to understand how expressiveness is so important, and sort of innovation, if you will, inside of these music and dance forms is crucial.
And improvisation was a huge part of that, and continues to be a huge part of Black innovation, that they both have talked about. There's also this difference between popular dance and a notion of social dance. Sometimes the two, converge. Sometimes they don't. And I'm wondering if maybe you could help us a little bit understand what those differences might be. And I say that because, again, when I look at the site for the Spurlock, it says, since the 1990s, blues dance has become popular in mainstream communities around the world. There's a distinct difference between something that is a social dance and something that might be a popular dance, especially when we're talking about certain social or communities and a notion of mainstream. So maybe if you could help us sort that out a little bit.
Maybe, but I think I'll need some help with you because I'm not sure I can follow it quite. I mean, I'm concerned with social dances, and I think of social dances that, most people could figure out some form of how to do within a couple hours. So that's kind of my baseline sort of standard for what constitutes a social dance. So we have lots of Black expressive forms that are not social dance. Like one cannot suddenly Vogue, for example, within a couple of hours. You're not suddenly going to be doing death drops. Or
you could, but it won't look very good.
Probably not hurt yourself. And interestingly enough, B-girling, is very similar. Like you're not going to necessarily do a 6-step and get on the ground and do a spin on your back. So, there's a way that in the way I think of these creative forms, those aren't really social dances in the way that, Chicago stepping might be. So, they're dances or the Harlem Shake, for example, they're dances that one can learn fairly quickly and share with friends and family. And then this idea of popular, I guess, do you mean more like Broadway and movie?
Well, I think I'm combining the two things, right? A notion of popular and mainstream.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So that social dance kind of so social dance kind of operates in certain communities in particular ways, and then it moves. And when it moves into the mainstream, it has another kind of set of qualities to it. And what the mainstream is different in different places.
No, that's true. But I'm pretty clear, like this mainstream definition, I don't really spend a lot of energy on that, Cynthia, personally. I mean, I'm not willing to be marginalized in my own life. I'm not saying I'm the center of the universe. I'm not interested in that either. But I'm not interested in narratives that make Black creativity on the side somehow. It's amazing. And what African Americans have done for the planet is still ongoing and unfolding. So I don't know how Black people could never not be in our own mainstream. And, we're amazing in the mainstream, and we made blues dancing, whatever that is. Let's see if we can figure that out. But, so this idea when other people who are not part of the communities that develop the dances take them on and start practicing them, they definitely change and become something else. And maybe one question we're asking each other now is, do they become their own thing as they lose connection to the communities where they were formed, if that's really how they developed, or, and then how do these sort of histories line up among each other?
And I do think that is some of what's kind of operating in this context, that what happens with a notion, I mean, first of all, mainstream often is a euphemism for white folks. And so, as it moves from the specificity of Black communities into a white space, there are things about it that have changed. And often historically, what has happened with dance is that when there's been a need to kind of spice up an existing form that is in, popular in white communities, then dances by people of color are often sourced for those kinds of elements. And we see that throughout, our dancing history. But it's interesting to think about kind of the elements that have been selected that are part of this new name of something called blues dancing. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about, what those particular kind of cherry-picked elements are for that form, and why that perhaps has traveled in the way it has.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I often think that one of the reasons Black culture is so incredibly potent on the planet is that we are so constantly disavowed. We're constantly in social justice movements and civil rights movements because we need to be. And our voices and our participation as citizens or as people on the planet is disregarded and disallowed so often. And yet we create these amazing forms of creative address and these amazing forms of music, or as you make experimental performance that really moves people towards an otherwise way to be, or really unimaginable vistas of possibility. So, our dances encode this sort of resistance and excitement, this possibility of a new relationship that one might never have thought of. They're in the dances. So the cherry picking, in blues dancing, we tend to hear a lot about being cool or relaxed or kind of, letting things slide. And, it's quite obvious. We can think about that like as a response to social disavowal. And it's like, what do you do? How do you demonstrate patience in the face of so much degradation? One has to be cool and sort of, let things sort of bend and shift and find your way. So that's a kind of cherry-picked aspect of Black performance that's quite appealing towards, what we're now calling a white mainstream, like that you can kind of be cool somehow, and that coolness will make you feel effective in the world somehow, or resistant in some way. So that's one of the things that's cherry-picked. There's so many. I guess I want to show a clip, because I've been thinking about blues dance in relationship to other forms that African Americans do practice on the regular in the 21st century. And blues dancing, as it's been called, isn't necessarily one of them. Like, you're not necessarily going to go see a whole bunch of African American blues dance events. Like, that's not really such a thing, but you will see Chicago stepping events. And one of the things, we're going to look at a clip from of freestyle stepping at the Aramac White Party from 2010. And one of the things you'll notice here is like, this is maybe something that came well after blues dancing, or dancing the blues, as you were telling us at the beginning of our chat tonight. It's come well after that, but it's something that's still quite strong in Black communities as a way to imagine social expression. So let's take a look at this.
Oh, yeah. Go to work, Taboo. Go to work, kid. Hey. Hey. Go to work. 109th in Michigan, man. Go to work, kid. Go to work, Taboo. Oh, yeah. Go to work, Taboo. Go to work.
Okay.
Okay, can we just say that beat was banging?
Of course we can. I love this clip, and I'm always respectful of folks who place their stuff on YouTube or Facebook. It's a moment of demonstration in a large social event. All the people are circled up to witness the kind of expert practitioners shine for a moment. It's not a demonstration that was pre-choreographed. That's not a thing here. As you were saying, it's improvised. And these two gentlemen are also demonstrating to us how Black cultures are incredibly mobile and versatile and willing to explore and curious about what else there could be. So in the dance circle, many things happen that might not happen, in other contexts. We see all of that here in this short demonstration from the stepping event.
That was awesome. I mean, I love the fast footwork, the gliding. It's like, I know Brother's shoes had to be smooth underneath so they could do that. The dropping down, the holding, the still moments. And then, of course, the style. Everybody in that room, dressed down.
We have a colleague, Raquel Monroe, who's an administrator now at Columbia College Chicago, and she writes about these events in really smart and unexpected ways. So we can look to her scholarship around these dance formations.
Yeah, that was really awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I'm wondering if you could, before we take a few questions, which we should probably do pretty soon, I'm wondering if you could talk about some of the invitations that you've had around the globe for other communities that are doing their own version of blues dancing across various territories and geographies, and just to talk about kind of the way some of our dancers travel.
No, it's a really great point. And it's a new area for me. I mean, I've been, like you, a researcher of African diaspora performance. And it was about 5 years ago, I got a call from pretty much a white organization called the Triangle Blues Dance Festival. And, they might not appreciate being characterized as a white organization, but that was my experience of working with them, because there were very few people of color. And also the attitude towards the dances was quite appropriative and weirdly proprietary, very paternalistic. Like, we're going to take care of this dance because you all have not. And I thought, well, that's odd. We have really strong ways to think about what these dances did before Zora Neale Hurston, the very famous anthropologist, was writing about them in the 1920s and 30s. So that affiliation led to me doing some lecturing about histories of African-American performance and dance. And then from there, it turns out that there is indeed a global phenomenon of especially Europeans, Eastern Europeans, and white people who are very interested in kind of characterizing a territory of blues dancing. So these engagements have taken me, yes, here, but also in Zoom calls to Amsterdam over the summer, and then physically in person to St. Petersburg to a large festival a couple years ago. And in that instance, I was teaching dance practice. I was teaching tap and teaching some of the forms that I do practice, but also offering some kind of basic African-American aesthetic value sort of dance gesture workshops for people. And it was really super interesting how there is a movement of curiosity and engagement with these forms. And then there's a lot of confusion about how they are or are not authentic. And that word is really vexed for us as Black people, because our authenticity is bound up with questions of the human that are still, quite frankly, unresolved for Black people in complicated ways. So it's been a really interesting journey. I imagine our conversation tonight is part of it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm looking at a question. How do we solidify this work inside of academia? Black dance is often relegated to an elective versus a requirement.
That's a great question. And Cynthia, you and I know we are founding members of an organization called the Collegium for African Diaspora Dance. And we formed this organization as a project of slippage first. I love saying that, which is the research lab I direct. Exactly towards this end, though. We're eager to have more writing and more intellectual debate and discovery and research around our forms of dance and creative address. Also more workshops and making of new work too. So we want them to go together. But I say that to say that there are hundreds and hundreds of researchers in the United States doing this work, and we need to make more space for people to be able to share their research out so that others can understand what's going on. Because the dancing will not be denied. The dancing is happening, and the research about the dancing is happening too. So we need to just keep sharing that information out.
And I think what happens with what has been happening, a responsiveness to this moment and the necessity to move our dances to the center as opposed to, the persistent relegation to the margins has made, certain areas of the field afraid for their own, legitimacy or continuity in secured places that they've had for decades since dance departments became, legit spaces for the practice of the form in the academy. So, might there be a way that we can talk about this shift that's happening that can assist folks in understanding that this is not taking something away from anybody, but it is really fortifying and nurturing, how a new way of thinking about physical practice.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, now we're starting to understand with our great awakening of 2020, which I hope is real, that we need holistic methods to understand excitement and passion, and also history and political possibility. And the thing about Black life is that it tends to bring many strands together in its realization of time and space. So if we practice these forms, we start to better understand how we can be among each other and lean in. So, and it's not taking the space of something else, it's creating new spaces for an enlarged possibility. That old phrase, let many flowers bloom. There is room.
That's right. I love it. Love it. Another question. Given the notion of appropriation, can you speak about, I'm gonna jump in here and change a term. Can you speak about breaking and the derivations of this particular form?
I'm so curious what the term was in there, but.
Well, it was called breakdancing. And I know that the practitioners prefer the term breaking.
So I'm sorry, now I was stuck on that. So I missed the rest of the question.
Okay, I'll ask it again. Given the notion of appropriation, can you speak about breaking and the derivations of this form?
Yeah, breaking is a really great example of how Black and Brown, if you will, BIPOC, Indigenous and people of color sort of creativity ends up sort of transforming a sense of possibility for other people. I mean, because B-girling or breaking were forms that Black and Brown people really sort of invented and sort of developed. And then it's interesting because they never really went away. But as more and more other folks got into them, it just kept expanding, expanding, expanding. And in terms of breaking, like, it's super interesting. In France, for example, is a nation state that values artistry in a certain kind of way. It's quite different from the United States. And France has 4 official forms of dance. And I don't know if you knew that. Did you know that? There are 4 official state-funded forms of dance.
I did not know that.
Well, this is interesting. You know where I'm going, what the 4 forms are. So we have ballet, everyone might get that. And then we have Baroque dance, so what they call their historical dance. Then we have contemporary, which are all the artists you've worked with and created for, and the people who are working now, if you will, or more recently. And the 4th is hip hop. Le hip hop is an official state form in the nation of France. So it's funded, there are hip hop companies all over the country, young people who want to express through this form, and mature artists are encouraged to create creations or works that are shared out to the general public. So, you know, here's a form, it's appropriation if there's maybe a kind of taking from and a kind of landing down somewhere else where it does something really different. This is a little bit not quite that, because French people and French culture has created its own kind of form of what they call le hip hop. And it is a state form that is enjoyed and supported in ways that it is not in the South Bronx or the US or the UK. So it's just very interesting how our dance practices and forms move. And sometimes they take root in other places and do really urgent work. There, it's often communities of color in France who are engaged in hip hop. So Algerian immigrants and Africans from the whole Francophone world who are now finding themselves in France for lots of reasons are expressing through hip hop creations. So there's a different kind of example of these transformations.
And I think just a few days ago, there was an announcement that breaking is going to be an Olympic area.
Well, this is tricky. This is tricky. I have family in this conversation, so I'm gonna hold my tongue. I actually saw my sister on this call with us tonight.
Yeah. Well,
sister,
it's been pretty controversial. There are folks who feel as though that is, you know, validation of the value of the form, and then there are those folks who are like, no, this is a continuation of a kind of whitewashing of the form and flattening out of it, and you know, the making rules around what makes what is more important than another aspect of it. So it's a very contested kind of moment around hip hop and b-boying and b-girling. Very interesting to see later on when we get to witness the Olympics. Okay.
Yeah, I think the dance will not be denied. I always go to that. Like people need to express and will find their way to express. So yeah.
Yeah, and there will always be, you know, the dance that might happen, the official dance, and then there'll be the dance that happens underground, and there be the explosive stuff. And so, you know, depending on what circuit you're in,
there you go.
You know, yeah. Okay, Ashayla Bird asks, how can students engage in this work beyond the classroom or the collegiate setting?
That's a great question. So interestingly enough, that clip that I showed was, you know, not in the classroom or the collegiate setting. So people are doing dancing sort of all over the planet in the ways that they need to. It might be that what we're calling blues dancing is much more like a studio form in a way. So, you know, that's not the classroom, the collegiate setting, and it's not, you know, it's its own space. Like dance studios might be the place where these dances are actually being done the most. And maybe that's where students would have to go to be involved in them.
Awesome. Melanie asks, I felt like the stepping clip you showed had a hint of shagging in it. Does the shag have any roots in African dance?
Does the shag have any roots in that? Of course it does. Asked and answered. I was with the question until the last twist. I was like, well, yes, it's a black dance. The shag,
that's right.
I mean, you know, the twist, the shag, the Watusi. I mean, now we're in the 60s and the rise of the Black Power dances. What's really interesting about the 60s, so this is after the Lindy Hop became the jitterbug. So Lindy Hop is something that Black people and people who were around Black people were doing, and then it becomes the jitterbug, so it can be on American Bandstand. It's a quite simple version of an older form. And you know, the shag, you get to these other forms in the 60s, and they're very similar. They're like simplified forms of dances that that have grown up in African American communities. What's interesting in the 60s, though, is that's where we also have the rise of funk, which comes just before the sort of the hip hop nation shows up. And funk dances are hard to categorize. I don't mean like the funky chicken. I mean like when people are actually dancing to James Brown. And you know it's funk, it's kind of like house. You know it's that, but you can't really say what it is because it's very particular and it's quite elusive, and that's what makes it magical.
Okay. Someone else asked, could you comment further on the place of queer expression in social dance? There was a question right before this that I missed that is connected, I think, to this one, that the clip that you showed, clearly two men dancing together, and the person right before this was asking about that event. So if you could comment further on the place of queer expression in social dance.
It's such a great question, and it's something I've been writing about for the past 3 or 4 years. I'm still working on this idea of improvisation, of our kind of like willingness to explore as being a willingness to also queer, if you will, ourselves or our imagination. And it just seems urgent to align Black creativity with this willingness to be non-normative. And for some, you know, like I know some Black people don't want to be queered. So I'm like, that's fine. I'm not trying to put that on everyone willy-nilly, you know, whether you want that or not. But that maybe this idea of non-normative is useful as another way to language queer. There is something about Black expression that is a willingness to go in an unexpected direction and see what's there. And this is how we shine. It's how we make a step, do something we didn't know it could do. It's how we extend a chord structure so that the musical sound is just translucent and unexpected. You know, it's what Charlie Parker or Mary Lou Williams were up to as musicians. And there's a way that it's always about bending a thing or stretching a thing in an unexpected way. So we can think about that as queering or making something non-normative. And then it can help us understand, again, what I called before the mutability of Black expression, or fungibility, or our willingness to be explorers in our creative address. We turn to dance and the arts to explore possibilities in really extravagant ways. You know, the distance between J setting or voguing to the Lindy Hop, these are extravagant expressions of a social possibility. And these are Black forms of address to social encounter. And they're quite remarkable and they're quite unusual and non-normative. And maybe that helps us rethink what we mean when we say queer. We can mean being especially concerned with a possibility that's not quite here yet and trying to bring it in. Let's bring it in. What if?
Yeah, and there are so many instances where, you know, something is not defined by a particular term that someone might feel disturbs things, but really does allow for this possibility. There have been countless occasions in which I've been at a party or a gathering where the music gets so, as the Caribbeans say, the music gets so sweet that it doesn't matter who you're dancing with. Two women will dance together, two men will dance together. That it just, that is not a thing. It is about the expression of the moment and the power of that community in that particular moment. So I love that there are these occasions where that does not require a certain kind of attention. It just is. It just happens in an environment. Okay, we have another question. Alyssa Noble says, do you all see conversations around the lineage of Black social dance forms happening in non-academic spaces where they are being practiced? Are there ways you have seen folks successfully communicate the cultural context of dance forms in more casual dance settings?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And of course, I'm going to say yes, but then I'm going to have the caveat, you know, I do work as an academic. So when I show up, the room changes because that's kind of an identity that I carry with me. So, you know what I mean? It's not like I can show up and be like hanging out in the corner, like nobody knows, you know, it doesn't matter. But I'll give an example. You know, we're going to start this, hopefully we're going to start this tap dance lineage archival sort of project here in my laboratory within the next year. And TAP is such a great forum. When you have TAP with a really committed teacher, you spend the first half of any session talking about its history. Like that's how TAP classes evolve. You don't just start dancing, shuffle step, shuffle step. No, you're talking about teachers and places and histories of the shoes and rhythm and maybe listening to music. And this is kind of the formal pedagogical process that's quite casual as well. So that I want to call it the formal process, but it's also probably not how you're taking TAP in a studio or in a university. But in the world, when you're studying TAP with someone who's committed to TAP, you know, if you have an hour-long session, first half hour is conversation. And it's conversation about lineage, remembering performances, thinking about things that we might have seen together. Those conversations become the groundwork for moving towards artistry. And maybe that's a thing that, you know, in any of these forums, we're moving towards how can we create things that are unexpected and dynamic as social dancers, as tap dancers, as experimental artists. We want to do something that allows this something else to happen. And to do that, we have to understand who we think we are and where we've come from. You have to have a sense of where you come from to understand where you want to go.
Absolutely. And, you know, what I thought of when I heard this question was the kind of informal and casual way that generations of Black people would talk about how a dance changes.
Okay.
What it's called in one generation as opposed to another. And you can have these dance-offs at a party and, you know, the elder in the party be like, I know what that dance when that was called the camel walk, or I knew that when that was. And so that's a way in which, you know, in non-academic spaces, people are talking about the trajectory of a particular kind of form. And that's, you know, it's super casual, it's really informative. You could literally take, you know, a historical note of how a dance has moved. And it can be, you know, it's really fun. Okay, let's see, I'm trying to find the next question. Ariyinka Alasade, excuse me if I say your name wrong, asks, can you talk a bit about reggae dancing movement in social dance?
Yes, not really, I'm sorry. It's not an area of specialization. I'm not going to perpetrate or pretend. There are some amazing researchers working on reggae. I'm thinking of Yannick Hume, who some of the people on the call might have heard of. And if you haven't, please look for her research. But there are many other amazing researchers of reggae. And, you know, it's not an area that I have enough information to even fake it on. So thank you for the question. That's beautiful.
All right. And Lisa Dixon asks, or says, my head is exploding with thoughts, questions, images. So thank you. My family has always done stepping and as a part of our life.
Yes.
So she says, I feel a bit mortified that I've not heard of blues dancing. Girl, don't be mortified. We don't talk about it that way. Are there any other current social, cultural dances that find themselves being mainstreamed from other cultures? Native American, Puerto Rican, Latinx, any conversation around that?
Yeah, that's such a great question and a good point. And, you know, the answer is in your question. Yes, of course there are. And it's a challenge that we have as researchers because our interest isn't to create material that can then be mainstream. That's not the point. But we're trying to help people understand or realize or remember the things that are already happening, the things that they're already doing. So I would just say like yes and yes and yes. I mean, the whole salsa and merengue, they were called crazes when white Americans started doing them. But they were, you know, dance forms that had particular values in the communities where they were developed.
And continue to.
And continue to. That's such a great point. And these dances, and they tend to not really go away. That's why I love your story about the camel walk or the elder in the room, because the dances, they stay a part of our are kind of like corporeal memory. They're how
Yeah.
we remember each other and the people we loved and the people who cared for us. The dances help us sort of ground our sort of memory and our imagination towards a better tomorrow. So, you know, these dances don't just disappear, they stay. Yeah, and they keep developing. But to answer your question, yes, it's happening all the time, all the time, all the time. There are people dancing and making amazing forms of dance, and then there are dances that are becoming fodder for TikTok or some other sort of social media app. That's also part of the story.
All right, we have, Tommy, we said that we were going to go until 5, so we're going to do one last question.
Beautiful.
And that's from Crystal Womble. And she says, as we think about blues dancing, which honestly, when it became a popular thing among students, I was more interested in bop, which was the predecessor to steppin'. There was a movement on the West Coast for teaching salsa in schools, which relates to your earlier comment, much like how square dance was a part of PE to highlight it as a culturally historic reference as a formal dance for Latin students. Can this be done for Black students with bop and steppin'?
Yeah, that's such a great idea. It's such a great question. These social dances move through spaces because people want them to. So maybe you asking the question are one of the people to help move the dance through the space. Someone has to care about dancing in a particular way enough to want to bring it into these other spaces, to open a studio or establish a curriculum and share it with younger people so that they can discover themselves through the dancing practices. As Black people, we believe in dance and art making and creativity. We believe in dance and music. It's like air and water. We all have a relationship to dance. Even those of us who say, I can't dance, I don't have good rhythm, like that's the thing. That's actually a category of identity. We are in relationship to dance. And we love it because we understand it's life affirming. And it is political, it's memory, it's future, it's family, it's the maternal, it's the spiritual world, it's the orishas. It is so many possibilities of human beingness that are shared among each other. And it's a chance to shine for a moment, to imagine oneself as something else, to imagine oneself in love with one's partner, if for a couple of minutes only, to imagine oneself able to do a thing that you never thought you could. Dance is special, and it's part of how the dance will not be denied. And Black dance will continue to offer us this technology of evolution, of transference, and of humility inside the condition of our shared encounters in life.
Tommy, that's a beautiful, beautiful love letter to Black dance. And I want to thank you for being our guest. I believe we're going to have a few closing words from the director of Spurlock.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Elizabeth Sutton. I'm the director of the Spurlock, and I extend my gratitude to Thomas DeFrance and Cynthia Oliver for leading this great discussion this afternoon. My thanks also to all of you who logged on to join us. As this challenging year comes to a close, the Spurlock Museum is extremely grateful for your continued support and our support of our community. You have all joined with our staff to find new ways to connect and exchange knowledge and experiences. So thank you for your collaboration and for your spirit of resiliency. As a museum, we know we have a lot of work ahead of us in the new year to create a better museum and a better world. But in this moment, my staff and I want to pause, acknowledge your support, and wish you happy holidays and a very healthy and happy new year. So thanks so much and have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.
Bye, thank you. Bye.
Bye, Tommy.
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you so much.
Thank
so much
you.
love.
Love you.
Ciao, ciao. Heading out. Thank you.